Welcome to SeniorFlix. My name's Tony Baker, and I'm the pastor at the Church in the Village here in Shepherd Village. Today we have a special guest to talk to us, Eric Tappenden of Chapel Ridge Funeral Homes. Eric is a very important part of our ministry here even at Shepherd Village. Eric is, for two reasons, Eric supports Shepherd Village and has done for many, many years in many ways. He supports our golf tournament and provides a lot of support for our residents and staff in funeral planning and funeral arranging. So, Eric, welcome to SeniorFlix. It's good to have you with us this morning.
It's my pleasure to be here, Tony, as always.
Thank you. Eric, there's a lot of talk around funerals, pre-arranging, waiting for the day, leaving it to the last minute. Funerals are expensive, and why should I pre-arrange and do stuff like that? And do I get a cremation? Do I get a burial? Do I have to get a plot? There's all of those kinds of questions.
Yep.
You offer a pre-arrangement plan. Why do people pre-arrange funerals?
It's one of the two things that has changed markedly in the last 50 years. Cremation has gone up, interestingly, in the GTA from about 5% in 1970, which wasn't that long ago because I was in university then, and it's now over 80%. So that's a huge social change in that period. And the other significant change in the way that we do funerals as a society is that people are beginning to pre-arrange a lot. In fact, there's over $2 billion in prepaid funeral funds being held in trust for people in Ontario alone, which is an enormous amount of money, which means a lot of people have done it. So why do people do it? I've often heard that the best speakers are good storytellers, and I think the reason for that is that stories sometimes give you an answer to a question like that just a straight up answer doesn't give you. So I'm going to tell you a story, if that's okay, if we have time.
Wonderful.
Let's pretend, Tony, that you have a 21-year-old daughter, and your daughter's been dating a guy for a couple of years, and she really seems to like him, and you do too. So one Sunday night, you and your wife have him over for dinner, and you're sitting around the dining room table, and you look down the table and you notice that your daughter and her boyfriend are making eyes at each other and smiling, and you think, aha, something's up. And sure enough, around the time you're eating dessert, your daughter clears her throat and says, "Mom, Dad, we have an announcement to make. We love each other very much, and we're going to be married." And everyone around the table goes, "Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. That's so great. Welcome to the family. This is so exciting. We're going to be able to plan a wedding." And then when things sort of calm down, you look at your daughter and you say, "So when is the big day?" And your daughter says, "Well, I think we'll get married this Wednesday." And everyone drops their jaw and says, "But you can't do that. Getting married is a major life event. You can't just plan that in a few days." How long do we take for people usually to plan a wedding? A year, something like that on average, 6 months, a year, 18 months? Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of things. You have to book the church and the pastor, you have to book the hall and the food, you have to arrange the flowers and the dress and all the things that you have to do to plan a major life event. Well, a funeral's a major life event too. Mm-hmm. And yet, for some reason, historically, we wait until the last minute, we wait until the death occurs, and then when we are in a mental and emotional state that we've never been in before, we are so upset and sad and not thinking straight, and we say to the people who are in the worst shape, "Now go plan a major life event in the next 2 or 3 days." Pre-planning avoids all of that. It allows people to think through carefully, without a lot of pressure, without a lot of emotion, what it is that they think is a good funeral in their family. And then when the death occurs, the family doesn't have to do all the hard work of planning that. And it takes that it doesn't take away the sadness, but the burden on top of the sadness, the logistical burden, takes it all away. And there are some financial reasons why people pre-plan too, because it locks in the cost at today's price. And no matter what happens to the cost of funerals, once you've paid for it, you've paid for it.
Let's get back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I love your story about the couple and they're going to get married and not planning everything. When pre-planning funerals, in that case, the couple, and they're sitting with mom and dad, and usually mom and dad get involved in the planning of the wedding.
Yeah.
Do you find that in these prearranged funerals, is it the adult children of the seniors that plan it for them, or is it the seniors themselves? Are the children trying to get ready for that event in their life? Are they doing this?
It's some of both. I think most of the time, it's seniors themselves who want to do it because they have usually been through a funeral for their own parents and having to organize it without the pre-planning, or they've been through it for a spouse and they think, I don't want my kids to have to go through that process. Adult children are often very death denying because they haven't lost a parent before. They haven't been central to organizing a lot of funerals, and so it's like, oh, Mom, don't worry, we'll look after everything. And of course, in the back of their mind, they're saying, we really haven't got a clue, but don't worry, we'll manage when the time comes. So adult children are often quite death denying, and sometimes even object to their parents doing it because they don't want to have that conversation of, well, let's talk about what's a good funeral in the Baker family or in the Tappenden family. They don't want to do that. And the seniors, though, kind of say, no, I really want to do this to save you the burden. But there are other times when seniors are getting on and they're not really even capable of planning for themselves. And so adult children often step in and say, let's just get this done.
Yeah, I'm sure if we've got some of our residents here, many of them have dementia.
Yes.
And I'm sure that maybe they don't have funeral plans made or didn't have those made before they started to develop dementia. So I guess at that point, that's when the adult children would step in.
Absolutely.
And now how do you deal with that when somebody's got dementia and the adult child is making the plans and that dementia resident has no input at all?
Yeah, that can be done. So adult children can arrange for their parents, and it's locked in and done. If it's the same as if you waited until the parent died and then the adult children get to organize it then. So they're just doing it ahead of time in this case. And most of the time, you know, if they've had that conversation as a family, do you want burial or do you want cremation? Do you want a period of some public visiting or do you not? Do you want the casket open? Do you want it closed? You know, do you want a elaborate one because you want a big celebration, or do you want something very simple and understated? And kids usually know their parents well enough to know kind of what they want. Very seldom do we get parents prearranging and then the kids saying, no, that's not what we're going to do. 99% of the time, kids will say, adult children will say, if that's what Mom wanted, if that's what Dad wanted, that's what we're going to do.
Good. Let's get back to the financial side of things. You said there are, did you say millions of dollars?
$2 billion in the province of Ontario in trust.
In trust. Now, what does that mean in trust? Somebody gives you money to buy a funeral.
Yep.
And how do you figure out the price of the funeral for the start off? And then what happens to that money when they pay you?
So the Ontario government back in the late 80s realized that this was becoming a thing. And so they realized there was no regulation of prepaid funeral funds. And so they put in place a piece of legislation. It was revised in 2012 called the Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act. And it has whole sections that deal with prepaid funeral funds. And it makes it so that it's risk-free. And the way that it works is if you choose an $8,000 funeral and you sit down with me, the first thing we do is to document it in detail. We itemize in a prepaid funeral contract exactly what's included and what's not included. And you pay the price that you would pay today for that funeral. That money then, if you pay it all at once, you pay the $8,000, either goes into trust or goes to an insurance company and is held in effect in trust. And it earns interest that accumulates every year. And the purpose of that interest is to offset inflation. So if you paid $8,000 today, and then by the time you pass away, the funeral costs $12,000, if there's only $11,000 in the fund, the family doesn't have to make up the difference. The price is guaranteed, so what you paid plus interest is all you're ever going to have to pay, and the funeral home has to make up the difference. And it works very well that way. If the opposite is true, if there's $13,000 in the fund and the funeral only costs $12,000, then by law, the $1,000 surplus goes back to the family. And it works really well. The other way that it can happen is if you don't have or you don't want to spend the $8,000 all at once, you can make time payments. So you can do it over 1, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Now, if you're 85 years old, you can't have a 20-year time payment plan. But there's an insurance company that holds the funds, and they basically will take the monthly time payments. And once you start making those, if you die before it's fully paid for, the insurance company pays the whole thing. So there are choices in terms of how you do it. If you don't want to put out all the money at once, you can do time payments and your funeral's guaranteed. If you want to pay for it all at once and get it out of the way, then you can do that, and it's very safe. The Government of Ontario guarantees these funds so that if the funeral home or the insurance company or the trust company went bankrupt or took off to the Cayman Islands with your money, the Government of Ontario guarantees the funds in the same way that the federal government guarantees bank deposits.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Well, that's really an interesting way. I didn't know that. That's very fascinating to hear, that the money is safe, you prepay, you don't have to worry about if the costs go up.
Yep.
And if the costs go down, you even get
a refund.
So it's money in the bank.
It is.
Eric, thank you so much for this insight into pre-arranging of funerals. We're going to close now, but I want to thank you. I think we're going to talk to you again later on to go a little bit deeper into this.
Sure.
But for now, thank you, Eric. And folks, what a wonderful introduction to what pre-planning funerals is about from Eric Tappenden, owner of Chapel Ridge Funeral Homes. Thank you, and see you later.